enter the journey of love as we sang in our opening hymn, a journey often into a foreign country, which is every other person, because nobody's like us and everybody's different than us, even though we have lots of similarities. So the journey into love, the journey of love, to think of that as trying to learn a foreign language, I want to focus really just on the second reading. It's Romans chapter 13, verses 8 through 10. There's a bit of a nuance on what St. Paul says here, where he says we ought to have no debt or owe nothing to anyone except to love one another. And then he says all the commandments summed up in this saying, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But I want to put a bit of a nuance on that and say, to love your neighbor, don't necessarily think that your neighbor, any other human being, wants to be loved the way you want to be loved. So to love your neighbor as yourself, it's a kind of a subtle distinction I'm making. To love because you want to be loved the way you recognize love and the way you express love. And it might be very different than someone else. Even the people in your own house, or your classmates, or your fellow parishioners, or your pastor, or people on the street. For example, stories I've heard about middle-class people having to acknowledge some unconscious bias, as the saying goes, okay? When street people who are asking for food and the like on the streets, come up to them. These are two true stories. One is some folks have an approach of, if you happen to be near a grocery store or even a fast food store, to offer to the person, instead of just giving you money, let me take you into the grocery store, buy what you want, and I'll pay for it. Or let me take you to, Pizza Hut or McDonald's or whatever it is, buy what you want, and I'll pay for it. So in one example, I think it was a fast food example, this person, a middle-class person, when someone was asking for money for food, he said, well, I'll pay for you some food. So they go in and they get whatever, a burger, whatever else. And then this guy is a friend of mine, was telling me, he said to the fellow, would you like me to buy you a Coke? And the guy says, oh, no, that's bad for your teeth. Soda like that. And my friend admitted, as he was surprised that a street person would be so concerned about, dental hygiene, And then a second example, at a more upscale grocery store, in fact, it was a New Seasons, a fellow out in the parking lot asking for money, and the guy says to him, well, honestly, don't take this personally, but my approach is not to give people money, but I'd be glad to take you into the store, and you buy what you want, and I'll pay for it. And the street person said, well, I can't go in there. So apparently there had been some issues with the management, right? So the fellow says, well, I'll go in and what would you like? And he says, oh, give me a sandwich. And ham, whatever. And then he said, the man, the middle-class person, asked him, what about something to drink? And he says, the street person says, kombucha. In fact, what's our local kombucha brand? Dr. somebody? There's yes, Dr. Brew, I think, whatever it is. But he knew, the specific flavor. He said, Dr. Brew, passion fruit, lavender, whatever. And again, this middle-class person was like, well, excuse me, it's like, and then thought, well, that's a clear example of unconscious bias, of being surprised that a street person likes and knows what kombucha is and that has a favorite flavor. So anyway, those people, to love them, those people on the street, just to strip away middle class and more well-off prejudices and biases and love them the way they want to be loved and get him his kombucha, right? So that's just a couple of examples, real-life examples. The reason I speak of it as being learning a foreign language, some of you have heard this. I've mentioned it myself, and I know when asking before, some of you have read any number of these books in a series called The 5 Love Languages. And so I just want to repeat this because not everybody's heard it, and it bears repeating. So this is an evangelical Protestant pastor who, in his years of marriage counseling, though this also applies to all kinds of relationships, so it's not just marriage, but he found over the years of talking with couples, when they felt like either one or both felt underappreciated or unloved, or they used to love me, but now he doesn't, or she used to respect me and now she doesn't, whatever else, when he would ask them to be specific about what it was that they felt changed or what was lacking, he found these patterns over the decades that he boiled down to this imagery of 5 love languages, that way people, he says, again, it's just his approach, the way people recognize love and the way they express love. He calls that their love language. And he said after a while, he seemed to think most people have, he says, one primary love language. I think it's probably more realistic because people are so complex that at least one or two might be the kind we our go-to defaults. And the 5 are this. The first is 2 words, but the same love language: time and attention. Second is gifts, giving gifts and receiving gifts. A third is acts of service, so practicality, getting things done, helping people. A fourth is words of encouragement and appreciation. And the 5th is touch. So touch is in everything from within marriage, husband and wife, all the wonderful things that God has given for physical intimacy within marriage, all the way to a couple of friends, fist bumps, or a pat on the back, or a firm handshake, or whatever it is, So all those are the 5 love languages: time and attention, acts of service, touch, gifts, and words of encouragement and appreciation. And he's talking about marriage, but this would apply, again, to any relationship. He says very, very rarely do people end up in a relationship where they both speak the same love language. So that's why it's like going into a foreign country where they speak a different language. An example might be, let's say two friends, but each of them thinks there's a little bit lacking in the friendship because let's say one of them travels a lot. And the person who travels, let's say her primary love language is time and attention. But the other friend, and one thing to say is, right, none of these languages is better than the other. There's nothing wrong or good about them. They're just, from his perspective, just neutral, natural ways. So it's not like, time and attention is better than acts of service. They're all equal. So let's say the other person's love language is gifts. So when her friend, who's a high-flying executive, travels all over the world, she's always the other one who stays home, stays in Hillsborough and doesn't get to go anywhere. Astoria is like the most exotic place you might go, right? She's like, she goes to Paris, she goes to London, she goes to Bangkok, and all that. Couldn't she at least bring me back some souvenirs or some nice French perfume or some Asian jewelry, whatever else? That's the one thing. She just never gives any gifts and souvenirs of her travels to me. Whereas the other person, because she is a time and attention person, as soon as she gets back from travel, her friend, one of the first people she calls up and says, let's go to lunch. I haven't seen you in 3 weeks. And then they talk about their friendship, and she might talk about her trip, and she's thinking, I'm showing my friendship to this woman by spending time with her. But she says, but she doesn't seem to ever really want to spend time with me. When I am home, she never calls me and says, let's just go out for coffee. So they are loving each other as friends, but they're talking past each other. It's like one is speaking Hungarian and the other one is speaking, Senegalese or something. That's true for all of us if you take this approach from Pastor Chapman. So to love and to fulfill the debt of love One way is to get out of yourself. One of the other phrases in the opening hymn we sang talked about carrying the cross. One way to take up your cross in relationships with one another is to decide and determine if you can observe the other person, other people in your life, and get a sense of what their primary, one or two primary love languages are, and then assess yourself and see that they're different. Take up your cross and do two things. Be happy and content and joyful to receive from them their love in their love language. And don't think about they never do X, Y, or Z for me because you just have a different love language. And then you be willing to go out of your way, to go out of yourself to show them love and friendship and support in the way they recognize it. So that we can let God lead us into the journey of love, which is a journey into other people's love languages, and grow more like Christ. Because I'll end with this. To be like Christ in our love is not in our gospel today, but from Mark chapter 10. So try to remember that or listen to the audio and go back to find the reference. Mark chapter 10, there are two encounters in that gospel passage. One is with James and John, the apostles, and one is with the blind man Bartimaeus. And in both cases, I'll leave it to you to find them within Mark chapter 10. Jesus says, "What do you want me to do for you?" Astounding from our perspective, looking back. The second person of the Trinity, God in human flesh, the creator of everything, fully sovereign, full power and authority over all that is. And he says to these people, these men, and it happens to be men, "What do you want me to do for you?" So let's have that as our disposition in our relationships with one another. Enter the journey of love, of what others would have us do for them, and strive by the help of God and being observant to do it in the other person's love language.